Well, we've been very clear that no country should be providing Russia assistance. President Biden has made clear if President Putin takes any step into NATO territory, NATO will respond to that. We're definitely continuing to flow in air defense systems to Ukraine. There are several different systems that we're providing. Well, yes, a very large additional amount of supplementary assistance to Ukraine was just recently passed by the US Congress, and President Biden signed it into law. And so that will be coming very shortly. It will cover a number of different things, including humanitarian assistance, but also military assistance and security assistance. So we have been already flowing these things in, but with this extra amount of funding, we will be able to continue to flow everything in and in even greater amounts. Well, I think you just saw that we did yet another round of sanctions just this week. We sanctioned individuals, some highly influential and wealthy individuals in Russia who have supported the Putin regime, and some members of the Duma who supported the aggressive action against Donbass. And we also did some sanctions on both exports to Russia, basically cutting off all luxury goods, and imports from Russia, various food and diamonds, which is quite a large export commodity for Russia. So we are continuing to roll these sanctions out. Since you've seen in the last 3 weeks, we have done a whole array of them, and we will continue to do so. The sanctions will not stop, and the economic pressure will not stop. And the good news about that is that we're seeing results. The Russian economy is in a nosedive. The Russian ruble is worth less than a penny, a US penny. It's completely devalued. The Russian stock market can't be open, because if they open it, it will crash to the floor. The Russian economy, Russian banks are failing. The Russian economy is very short of many goods. And the Russian oligarchs are hurting because we have sanctioned many of them and frozen assets, including their luxury yachts. So we will continue to put economic pressure on Russia and do as we said we would do 3 weeks ago or more before President Putin came into Ukraine, and that is crippling sanctions. And we'll continue to do those. We're also working with Europe and our other allies and partners to make sure they also put sanctions into place so that Russia has nowhere to hide. We already have some sanctions on Belarus for anti-democratic behavior, but we are now looking at sanctions that we can put on Belarus if they decide to enter the war directly. And we hope that Belarus will resist President Putin's entreaties for them to join. I know that for a long time, Belarus was a good neighbor of Ukraine. Belarus and Ukraine got along. There were no problems on the border. The borders, in fact, were open, didn't have a lot of barriers between them. And it's unfortunate now that President Putin is putting this pressure on President Lukashenko and trying to force him to go after Ukrainians. I mean, which I think most Belarusian people think of Ukrainians as their neighbors and even their cousins, as similar people. And so I think not only would I think most Belarusians don't want to attack Ukraine or send their sons to, attack Ukrainians. And I think it's another horrible act of President Putin to try to force Belarus into this war. Well, the United States is definitely very concerned about Russia's bad behavior around Ukraine's nuclear sites. My understanding is Russia now controls 2 of them, in Zaporizhia and in Chernobyl. And it's irresponsible. And we are working closely, our Department of Energy is working very closely with the IAEA and other international partners to try to help in any way we can to make sure that these nuclear sites are kept safe and that Russia is not able to act irresponsibly in a way that would cause catastrophe for Ukraine, of course, but also Belarus, Russia, and European neighbors. So we are working closely and doing what we can to make sure that that doesn't happen. Well, of course, this is just another horrendous step by President Putin. Not only the killing of American citizens, which of course as an American concerns us very deeply, but also killing journalists. I mean, journalists are supposed to be neutral observers and certainly peaceful. They're not participating in any sort of military activity. And so what they're doing to journalists, similar to what they're doing to innocent Ukrainian citizens, and similar to what, by the way, they're doing on civilian objects like nuclear plants. All of these things are the sorts of things that can be war crimes once the International Criminal Court takes a look at the circumstances. And we are working with Ukraine to help Ukraine document all of these things that the Russian forces are doing to make sure that President Putin is held to account ultimately for the sorts of crimes he's committing. First of all, I would say that I think President Putin has started lobbying attacks at the West because he's been thwarted in his attempts to take over eastern and central Ukraine. President Putin thought that this war would be over in 10 days, that he would have all of Ukraine in 10 days. Clearly, he has met much stronger resistance and a much stronger fighting force in Ukrainians and in the Ukrainian military and the civil defense forces than he thought he would. So now President Putin is frustrated and he's doing things that are even more escalatory and more horrendous than he's done so far, and that is trying to lob missiles to the West. President Biden has made clear if President Putin takes any step into NATO territory, NATO will respond to that. And so we're watching very carefully, and we hope that President Putin does not take that step. The reason that we are not supportive of a no-fly zone is because our view is that it will escalate the situation. And our desire is to de-escalate the situation. So if we go into direct combat with Russian troops, that means that NATO is declaring war on Russia. That doesn't mean that Ukraine will be safer. It means all of Europe will be under more threat. And because Ukraine is in the middle, Ukraine will also be under significant threat because they'll be in the center of it all and the destruction could be even worse. So what are we doing instead? We're helping Ukraine to have basically its own ability to police its skies by providing various anti-aircraft and other means of Ukraine defending its own skies against Russian planes. We are definitely continuing to flow in air defense systems to Ukraine. There are several different systems that we're providing, and I would add that Ukraine has been extremely effective at using these and has really been, I would say, done a very good job with the weapons that it has, and will continue to provide those so that Ukraine can continue to defend its skies. Well, we've been very clear that no country should be providing providing Russia assistance or helping Russia somehow go around sanctions. We've been very clear about that to all countries, and we have also been clear about that directly to China. I would say that the United States has no faith in President Putin to follow any rules of the Geneva Convention or of warfare. I mean, obviously, he's already broken those. He's killed and targeted civilians. He has targeted nuclear plants, and he has targeted civilian apartment blocks. He hit a maternity hospital. So clearly, President Putin is not fighting a gentleman's war, and he's not following the rules the Geneva Convention set out. So, of course, we're concerned about actions that he may take against any Ukrainian official, including President Zelensky. But I've got to say, President Zelensky has been incredibly strong and inspirational to the country. He's clearly set the tone to fight Russia and not to give up. And I think it's very admirable, and I have great respect for his courage and his willingness to stand his ground and fight. Well, what we've tried to do is make intelligence public as quickly as possible to let the world know what Russia is doing ahead of time so that Russia cannot somehow spin a false narrative. Russia loves to make things up, and President Putin lies. He's a liar, and he lies about why he does things. He lies about what Ukraine's doing, and he lies about Russia, what Russia's doing. So part of the reason for putting out intelligence information publicly, really much more than we've ever done before, is to show people what he's planning so that when he does it, nobody can believe some lie that he makes up about, some false flag operation so he can blame it on Ukraine. And I think that's been very effective because the whole world is on to President Putin. They all know that he's a liar, and nobody believes him when he makes things up and says things about Ukraine. One of the most recent things is he's talking about these supposed biolabs. That's a complete fallacy that he has used for years. He's used it in other countries. He's used it in Georgia. He used it in Ukraine previously. What these are actually attempts by the countries themselves to make sure that pathogens that the Soviet Union illegally used in these countries are secure and aren't getting out in the public. So it's a way to make sure that people are safe. And President Putin has just turned that around to suggest that it's something it's not. So in all these cases, when we have information that President Putin is going to try to blame something on Ukraine or the West, we'll put it out there. So that way, when he tries to do it, it's clear to everybody that he's making it up, and he is trying to create some sort of pretext for what is a completely illegitimate war on his part.